Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second annual Cardiac Inherited Disease Family Meeting. What a fantastic turnout. I know when we were planning for today, we ended up playing with chairs and thinking, oh, how many do we need? But this is absolutely full. How lovely to see everyone. And actually, as well as a full house here in person, we have a live stream happening due to wonders of modern technology. And if any of you have seen these live streaming events like this with people up here talking, the thing that always disappoints me is that you never actually get to see the faces of you guys. So what I thought we'd do, just to start, I'm going to swing this around, I've got the thing. Can we all just give everyone a wave that's joining us? Yeah, good. Yeah, nice and friendly, make them feel welcome. Good. Yeah, nice. Actually, if I thought about that, we could have, instead of a Mexican wave, we could have done an ECG wave. Yeah. Or maybe like a long QT wave, or in the middle of the massive spike. Anyway. So yeah, lovely to have you all here. You're probably wondering how I fit into the CIDG family, and I guess I represent an extension of that family, and I'm from CureKids. My name's Tim, and I look after the research side of what we do. And for the last sort of 15 years, CureKids have been sitting alongside the CIDG team providing funding. I think the first ask we ever had back in 2001 from John and Jackie and the team was for $10,000. And I think over time, we've probably donated close to $1.5 million or close to $2 million even. But yeah, this is definitely not about CureKids, this is about you guys, this is your night. But actually when John called me, he said, would you guys like to be involved? We were involved last year and he gave us the call back, which is great. We of course gratefully accepted that. We find it a real privilege. Although I should say that Jackie, I found out afterwards, said actually, could we ask CureKids to see if they could get a celebrity like The Bachelor or somebody to do this? So sorry to disappoint Jackie. Actually, there's a lot of guys and girls a little bit disappointed right now as well. But no, we're really delighted to be here. And the main reason why we're so proud to be here is that CureKids has been funding research for about 45 years. Actually, it is 45 years this year. About $40-something million of research that we've put across all aspects of child health research. And very recently, we did an impact assessment of all of that portfolio of research. And when you look at the clinical impact of those different programs of research, and then you compare them against each other, the work that's been achieved by the Cardiac and Inherited Diseases group here sits right at the very top of that pile of impact. And for us, it's something we're enormously proud of. Not that we've done any work, but that actually we've got behind an organisation and key people that have helped realise they have a lot of impact. And when we talk about impact, it's impact on families and community, and actually you are a representation of that here tonight. So it's a real privilege to be here. And actually the reason why I think actually CIDG is so impressive is because it's not a well-funded government program. John, Jackie and the team have just, excuse the French, just worked their asses off over 15 years to make this thing work. And when we're talking about making things work, we're talking about saving lives. And that's taken a lot of personal sacrifice from John and Jackie and the team. And it's not that they've done a good job, it's actually now the world looks at this model and says there's the best practice. That's all we need to emulate. And they've fought for 15 years to get to the point where we are here now. So I know today is about the family journey, but it's also about celebrating that journey of CIDG over 15 years, of which we are very proud to have played a small part in helping make that happen. So we've got some fantastic speakers that you're about to hear from. CureKids as a research funder are really excited about, yes, the research aspect of it, the clinical aspect of it, but more importantly the stories of the families which you'll hear throughout the evening. So, to crack on with things, I'd like to hand over to Professor John Skinner, someone that doesn't need an introduction to most of you. And I think I was actually just watching this event last year, and you were commonly referred to as the man in the cape for your superhuman efforts, and I think everyone would agree with that sentiment. So I'll pass over to you, John. Please make me feel welcome.
Well, thank you. It's a real privilege to be here. Excuse me for my casual cup of tea up here. I've got such an awful cough. I don't have a spasm on stage. But look, isn't it wonderful that you're all here? I'm so privileged to see you all, and it's fantastic. Cure Kids in 2001 actually funded the first 10 non-QT genetic tests. And that in itself set us on this road. In 2006, they funded the molecular autopsy, so that when we had an unexplained sudden death, they were able to fund genetic tests to find out why somebody had died suddenly, and we were able then to cascade the family. That was the first in the world by a country mile, and in 2008 the Ministry of Justice took over the funding of that, and many countries still struggle to fund molecular autopsy. That's something Cure Kids should be very proud of. And another Red Letter Day was actually this year in July. For the first time, I am actually paid by the Ministry of Health 1 day a week to do this, which is just marvellous. And they're actually now funding Jackie 5 days a week, and Louise, you've seen also the CIDG team support stood right there for a week as well. And this makes, a full week, this makes such a difference to us. It makes it happen. And I think Cure Kids should be very proud of that. Now, what am I going to talk about today? Not very much, because I want this to be about the story. Now, can I make this thing move forward? There we go. I'll just go back there. Here we go. I can see the slides now. So, the big question is, who out there in the community is at risk? And how can we detect them? Now, our mantra is detect, protect, enable. We need to detect people in the community who are at risk of sudden cardiac death, because we can protect them, and then we can enable them to get back to what they want to do. These are some of the conditions. You'll hear about some of them tonight. Long QT syndrome, Regarda syndrome, CPVT, these are the electrical disorders, where suddenly out of the blue the heart looks completely normal, and you can end up with a blackout. And on the far side over there, you've got the muscular disorders, the hypertrophic cardiomyopathies, dilated cardiomyopathy, and congenital right ventricular cardiomyopathy. They have two things in common, actually. One is they can cause sudden death. The second is they're familial. And if you detect one, you can detect many. And you do this by using heart tests and genetic tests. And that is now what we're really good at. We have a national service. It's not a research program, this is a clinical service, which is just great. I'm very proud of it. So we can do all these things to protect people and allow them to get on with their life. It's very important to enable people. We don't want people who've been diagnosed with long QT syndrome or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy to sit and watch on the sidelines. We want to get them back in. And there's a big study we're about to embark on, and I've been inviting some of you in collaboration with the Mayo Clinic and Yale over in the States, asking people who have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and long QT to monitor their activity. We'll be giving you Fitbits, and you'll be able to, over 3 years, tell us what you get up to. We'll be looking at outcomes. Because we quite secretly and quite fervently believe that actually most people should be able to get back to full activity. So that was me back in 2006. Sorry, that's the coffee stuff. It's a sorry story, isn't it? Jackie and I were a little bit alone around that time, but now we're not alone. And that is a picture of the team from last year. These are the people who are paid. There's Jackie and Louise, Mandy and Graham, and they are the sort of backbone of this organisation spread across the country. We still yet have to invade the South Island properly, but we do have collaborating clinicians there, but we don't have a coordinated there yet. So in March 2006, that young man trying to get this thing underway, we had 56 genetic diagnoses and 170 individuals registered with the Cardiac Inheritance Disease Registry. As of this week, we have 2,404 individuals registered with CIDG, and that's 419 new registrants over the last 12 months. We have 840 definite genetic diagnoses, and that's 100 new diagnoses over the last 12 months. It's quite extraordinary, and I pay tribute to all my colleagues across the country for watching out for these people and making these diagnoses. I want particularly to acknowledge Professor Don Love, also who's made a professor this year, just like myself, and he's been instrumental for us in our growth, and he's developed this gene panel that we can use for testing here right in New Zealand. This is top quality, cutting edge, very good clinical tool for you and your families. The other day, An 11-year-old boy presented after a blackout. He'd been playing around on a quad bike in the farm, and he had this blackout. He had a story of other blackouts, one after he'd been swimming, and we couldn't quite figure out what it was. So what we did was we put a reveal device in. And there it is. That's a digital loop recorder right there. See, there's an X-ray, the heart in the middle, and just under the skin, we implanted this, about the size of a chewing gum pack. And that records the ECG continuously. And this young man went to open his family church to do a little speech at the beginning. He walked up towards the stage and fell over backwards. And this was what we saw. Up the top here we have the normal rhythm. Here we have the onset of ventricular tachycardia, the dangerous rhythm. At this point you would have lost consciousness. This is ventricular fibrillation, known to you or I as a cardiac arrest. This organizes into ventricular flutter at this point and gratifyingly, spontaneously reverts to normal rhythm at this point. This wasn't the other day, this was 15 years ago. And I'm really delighted to introduce Scott Kappa, who's going to tell us his story.
Thank you very much, John and Jackie, for inviting me to come along here tonight. It's a privilege to come and speak to me after all I've done for me, so this is the least thing I can do. That was me, Mango Ridge Primary in 2001, perhaps 2000. Would have been about 10 then. And lived in Mango Ridge, had a very normal life, and had 4 sisters. I was born in 1988, which makes me 28 now, second of 5. I had a stillborn brother, but life was very, very normal to me. I was a normal young child, doing normal activities. There is some, this doesn't have anything to do with CPVT, but there is my maternal great-grandmother had neurogenia condition which been evidenced when she was a teenager, and my maternal great-great-grandmother also had planes. But there's no other family history of unexplained death or sudden collapses. And where it started was, I was we were getting filmed for swimming at a primary school, and I swam the length of the pool, and then jumped out and walked up the side and found myself on the ground. The only thing I knew was I'd come around, fall on the ground, and I've got a little scar on my chin, and went to the doctor after school. It's Dr. Tim Farquharson from Greenland Medical. He said it wasn't a He said it wasn't a fall, it was a sudden collapse. And it was the first sign that something was wrong. Another time I was at my grandpa's farm out in Papakura and riding a quad bike with my younger cousin. We were running along the bottom of a gully about to go up a hill. I was driving a 400cc quad, 11, quite a big quad, and fell off the side. Had another episode of CIDG, and I came around. I felt absolutely terrible when I come around on the ground. I was in the mud, and so I crawled up to a barbed wire fence and just held myself there. In the meantime, my cousin, who would have been about 6 or 7 at the time, with pure adrenaline, grabbed this quad, spun it around, and tore off up to the farm shed. Yelled out to Grandpa that something was wrong, and Grandpa came down and got me, and we hopped in the car and went to the doctor back to Greenland Medical. They did an ECG there, which showed completely normal heartbeat. They then thought it could have been suspected epilepsy, so I sent to neurologist, but this was ruled out. Was close on a few months later. I was back at the farm again, and this time we were doing some fire at the bottom of the gully, and we were towing another quad out because it got stuck. So I was on this quad, 11-year-old again, and we were tearing up this hill, and the quad started slipping backwards because it was losing traction. I felt myself go to a faint, and the last thing I remember was putting the handbrake on, and that's the last thing that I came to. About 10 minutes later, in the meantime, I was there on the ground, completely incontinent, not breathing, and my uncle was just yelling, "Breathe, you bastard." Grandma did mouth to mouth with me, and I reverted back and came to life again. Went into the doctors, had another ECG, showed completely normal. And about, I don't know how many months later it was, we're from the Women's Prison Christian Church, and I was at church and we were playing a game outside called Manhunt, and I was just a little kid's game, and got a sudden fright when someone found me in this game and collapsed at church, and they called the ambulance. It was after then that Dr. John Skinner decided it was time to insert a reveal device to capture some data if I had an episode. In the meantime, we'd done a lot of tests to see if it was a common garden faint and other things which hadn't revealed anything. This is the exercise test in 2001, which would now be able to detect CIDG. Is that correct, John?
That's right.
Which we didn't. The gene wasn't diagnosed then when I had it, so I didn't know what they were looking at. 6 months went by and I had no more episodes. All I had was a reveal device. It was a small device, as Professor Johns explained, implanted in the skin, and I wore a little thing which looked like a leatherman on your belt. And whenever you had a faint, hopefully my parents were around, they'd grab the little whatever it was and set the reveal off to record what was happening. There was one night, would have been about 6 months later after the last quad accident, and we were opening a local church, and there was about 180 people there. Opened the doors and fell back on my head, collapsed. My mum then got the reveal device going and got into ambulance, went to hospital. They downloaded the device. That was on a Friday night. Saturday morning, they came in with some very interesting information, and I wouldn't say excited, but alarmed what was happening. It was a mystery what was happening. They didn't know what was doing, but Professor John had to immediately do something to prevent death, so we implanted a cardiac defibrillator, ICD. Some of my family members are concerned that this was going to go too far, so advice was sought from international experts who suggested this indeed was the only option. Although there's no diagnosis, no cause had been found, the data captured on the reveal device was sinister and close to fatal and not to be messed with. So I think it was less than 2 weeks, but no, but with getting the surgery and I was wide up. My feelings at that time, just to help the families who had similar children, was that I was only 12. I didn't attend the second year of high school because I was at hospital so much at homeschooling. But I could carry on with the normal things of life apart from contact sports, so I started to umpire rugby and league and things like that instead. But I knew that with the defibrillator implanted I was safe as anyone should something happen, so I lived a normal and happy life. I thought I might live to, like some of those in the Bible, up to 900 years, because I knew that the defibrillator was the only thing that could save me. That was me after the first implant in Green Lane Hospital when I was age 12. Very, very good nursing team and awesome support from John and Jackie and those. It was just amazing the support we had, and it made me feel very looked after, and you knew that you were in very good hands. This is me a few years later. We shifted down south. That was in 2006, so I would have been 18 then. We had an Argo, we did a lot of river cruising on weekends when there wasn't too much to do in the small town of Oamaru. And later, a couple of years later, I was into snowboarding and lived a very normal boy's teenage life. I wasn't exactly an adrenaline junkie, but I knew I could do things like bungee jumping. Now, they went on to testing to find an answer. My whole family underwent various blood tests, exercise, ECG scans, etc. Blood samples were collected and sent overseas. Months And years went by when we were living down south and we lost contact with John Skinner. Many of the tests we did came back negative. Then one day the call came. I'm doing research and testing and finally found an answer to me and my family. The diagnosis was CPVT, catecholaminergic precipitated ventricular tachycardia caused by a mutation in the ryanodine gene. And I was just talking to Professor John before this, and there's 20 in New Zealand with this known condition. So it's a very rare but very scary condition. What were the implications of this condition and having an ICD? As I've travelled a lot for business, one of the first things I had to get used to was avoiding the security X-ray machines, but that's very common with people with pacemakers, so that didn't cause any problems. Contact sports restricted, as I said, so I found myself running games. I've now had my third implanted cardiac defibrillator. The first one lasted 3 years, the second one lasted 5. This one's lasted 7 or 8. So the technology's getting better. 2004, this was not the best battery change of my life. They put an ICD in, and when they implant an ICD, they always test, and they did the test and it didn't go off, so they had to use an external defibrillator, which knocked you around for a bit. They then put another device in. I think at the screw in the second time, the third ICD change, they put another lead down my back to get a better shock. As a family, we elected to go undergo testing and advise the results. And I won't go into this too much, but we'll leave that on there. Oops, yeah, I escaped. As I said before, we have a normal life, 18, 19, 20-year-old teenager experiences. I did do a little bit of water sports, but I wasn't, as I said, a high adrenaline junkie, so kept away from bungee jumps. It's 11 years since the last symptom of CPVT, and the only time I've used the ICD. I was doing a few crazy things on a Friday night, had a few drinks and decided to have a wrestle with a friend who's the type of friend that wouldn't give up. And all of a sudden, he found he had to give up because I was lying there limp on the floor. But I came around, had the shock, came around, and that was the last CPVT symptom I've had. So I've had 6 incidents and self-converted from 5 and defibrillator kicked in on number 6. I'm now 28, married, and we have a baby due on the 7th of February. With the condition, there is a 50-50 chance of my child having it. However, my wife and myself are very comfortable with this, and we know it can easily be taken care of with medication. This is done 3 weeks after the baby is born. They test, see if it's got a condition, and it would immediately go into the pocket. With medication and the technology these days, as we know, I couldn't see any issues with living with CPVT. If it's detected and it can be easily controlled. So that's the end of the presentation. But just to help those families that have these conditions, I felt that someone was really watching over me, and there's many people that could have died in the first incident. I've lived a very normal life and have no complications with this condition now, but very thankful for the support and what I've had from John and Jackie. I didn't say much more, but we go with them.
Thank you, Scott, for sharing your story so bravely. I know your family's here to support you. So, all I think when I hear a story like that is actually part of the legacy you leave behind through your story. You mentioned there's another 20 odd cases now of CPVT. You must be one of the first diagnosed. It's one of the first diagnosed in New Zealand, and you're part of that research legacy and helping do exactly that: detect, protect, enable for generations to come. Pretty impactful experience that you've been through on so many So I just want to move on now to hearing from one of our many very talented specialist physicians that are in the room tonight. And excuse me for reading these intros, but I want to make sure I get them right. So Catherine Waddell Smith is an adult trained cardiologist, and she's doing a clinical and research fellowship with the Cardiac and Infectious Disease Registry. She's been doing that since 2013. And Catherine's focus in her clinical research it involves identifying people at risk with long QT syndrome and ways that we can reduce that risk using beta blocker tablets and the sympathectomy. I had this right so many times. Sympathectomy. And there's a research funding organisation that just wanted to acknowledge that her work has been supported by the Heart Foundation of New Zealand, the Greenland Educational and Research Fund Fellowship, and funding of these things is so important, and at that interface between clinical and research, this is where we're learning so much about these conditions. So I'll hand it over to Catherine. Catherine, please make her feel welcome.
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks everybody for coming. It's so lovely to see you all here. I'm talking about ways that we reduce and identify people at risk of non-QT syndrome and how we reduce risk. So we all know that events in non-QT syndrome are often precipitated by exercise or surprise. So how do we reduce risk? And that's with beta blockers, by taking a tablet every day. But do people take tablets? We looked actually through some data from our Auckland cohort of patients and looked at pharmacy dispensing data and found that just over half of our lovely patients don't even have enough tablets at all to take tablets 80% of the time. Only 13% of our patients have enough tablets picked up from the pharmacy to take a tablet every day. And I have to say I was a bit surprised. Because we know that these medications reduce the risk of people having sudden blackouts and dying. We tried to find out why it was so low, why so few people had enough tablets. And it didn't matter how old you were, if you were a boy or a girl, where you lived, what your ethnicity is. It didn't matter if you had presented with a resuscitated death, if someone in your family had died. None of these things seemed to matter, although it was a small study, so all these factors may play a part, but we just weren't able to detect it in this study. We're planning a follow-up questionnaire with people in New Zealand and our friends in Australia, Amsterdam and the USA, and we're trying to find out why. But I'd actually love to hear from you guys. If you've got some opinions about why you choose not to or forget to take medications, I'd love to hear about it. I'm the person who spammed your chair, so actually my phone number and email are on all of your chairs. But what if people, obviously lots of people don't take their medications, and some people participate in high-risk activities as well. How do we deal with those people with this sympathectomy, which is a keyhole surgery procedure done through the armpit, and it's cutting the nerve supply to the heart. So it's like a surgical beta blocker tablet. And this funny picture on the left is all those lines are showing that people have had lots of faints and blackouts and resuscitated death. And then this vertical line is when they've had the procedure, and you can see afterwards that the rate of events goes way, way down, so it's really effective. How do people cope with having this procedure done? So there are some side effects This is a lady who ran on a treadmill for me because lots of people said after exercise they go bright red on one side, sweat a lot, and the other side is pale and quite dry. Fascinating. And also, this very mild, this is a young girl, but you can see this pupil is a bit smaller, and very subtly, this eyelid is a tiny bit droopy. And we knew that that's a side effect of this procedure, but the minority of patients who reported this all said it was very mild and they weren't worried by it at all. But as a summary of the side effects, you can see all of these dark blue squares are the side effects that people reported. And I spoke to all 44 people all over New Zealand who'd had this done, and these are the patients going across in the rows. And the side effects are having this dry skin on the left side, having this colour split, most commonly, and this sweatiness on the right-hand side. And then other less common side effects as well. You'll also see on the far right that there are a lot of green ticks, and they are people saying that they, even though they have these side effects, that they were really happy that they'd had the surgery done, and that also they would recommend that someone in their position go and have a sympathectomy. Obviously it wasn't 100%, but you can see overwhelmingly there's very high satisfaction amongst the people who've had it done. People said that they see the sympathectomy as a passage back to normal life. It's a peace of mind that they've had it done. Do it the sooner the better. It's extra insurance, people say. It makes my life better. I wish it was done earlier. And there were lots of themes of that. People feeling safer, and it was a good insurance policy, and just do it as soon as you can. Now, I have spammed your chairs. That's because a lot of my job is doing research, and thank you, all of you, for participating, talking with me on the phone, and being part of our registry. It's so very important. One thing we're investigating is the use of Holter monitors, which is a 24-hour heart rate monitor, which we apply, you go and do everything normal except get wet. And we want to know if we can identify people who have long QT syndrome, and if we can identify people who are at risk of fainting very quickly. So at the moment, we're looking for actually mainly healthy young kids. So brothers, sisters, school friends, anybody. And I apologise for the shameless plug. But my email and phone number are on this sheet that's on most of your chairs, and we'd be delighted to hear from anybody who would like to wear a Holter monitor and take $20 home to say a small thank you. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you, Kitchen. Really important work. Now, I'm really excited about this next talk because I didn't even know that this service existed within and around CIDG. So I'd just like to introduce Dr. Liz Painter. Liz is a clinical psychologist who founded the Green Lane cardiac psychology team, so another one of the pioneers in the group. Liz has many years' experience assisting patients who have experienced traumatic cardiac events, such as requiring a heart transplant, trauma following near sudden death, suffering recurrent heart arrhythmia, and recurrent ICD shocks, as well as families where there's been a sudden cardiac death. Liz has dedicated her career to assisting patients and families as they cope with life-threatening events, and is integral to the cardiac team in Auckland and throughout New Zealand. All yours.
Thank you. I'm going to thank you all, the organisers, for inviting me, but I'm also going to apologise that I've turned into a teenager in the last few weeks, and I've got braces on. And I'm way past being a teenager chronologically, so I've got a bit of a lisp. And there are some words that I struggle with talking. I'm much more sympathetic to my children when they were teenagers that used to grumble about their teeth hurting and not talking properly, so apologies for that. Right. Over the years, as forgot what your name is.
On Tim.
Tim. I'm getting a bit old as well, so that dementia is creeping in the elderly moments. I have had the privilege of meeting some of you here, and many families who've had to deal with a range of cardiac conditions, including cardiac inherited diseases. And with that, dealing with the range of issues that come with that, dealing with the sudden unexpected death of a family member, uncertainty of diagnosis, decisions on management, treatment options, all of that with you. So what I'm going to try and do in a couple of slides is share with you some of that information I have learned and some skills that may help some of you who are in this process of managing. What I want to say as a psychologist, and I do explain this quite a lot, that I'm interested in how ordinary people cope with extraordinary events. I'm not interested in people who have ordinary lives and lose the plot. I'm talking about people like you who are ordinary and going through an unexpected or an ongoing crisis and the reactions that go with that. So I'm not very good at technology either, so let's hope this works. So, seeking knowledge and getting support. The two first things that help with coping and resilience. So the first thing is knowledge. Most human beings worry more about what they don't know than what they do know. So I like to suggest to all of you, it's important to understand and get the information, and that's what's been so good with John's team in providing some answers and knowledge for you over the years. When we don't know why things happen, it makes it harder for us. So for the people who were in Christchurch a few years ago, when the ground shook, initially they didn't know what it was. Now they're skilled and know what it means. They understand what it is. So if you're still left not knowing things or understanding, please ask. It's really important. As I said, we worry less about the things we know, even if it's bad news. We want to know about it. It's also important to understand about what are the common reactions when you've been through a time that isn't normal, when it's an extraordinary time. There are a whole range of reactions when dealing with tragedy or uncertainty or still not knowing what's going on. And many families describe it to me as a bit like being on a roller coaster. You're going up and down, having some good news, no news, bad news, and coping. All I say is that we can help you not remove being on the roller coaster, but help you hang on tight so that you get to the end at some point eventually. It can be, you're all different, and the time that it takes to go along there can vary, but you're going to have to ride that roller coaster for a while. You'll also find that understanding that you go through a whole range of emotions, a whole range of physical reactions when you're dealing with something unexpected or uncertain. You'll have some physical signs of which the most obvious is feeling tired, achy, not sleep very well, and a whole range of those emotions that you can see up there, the sadness, actually I can't read from here, but sadness, and fear, embarrassment, worry, anger, and feeling upset. Whole range. As I say, understanding that those are common in extraordinary situations. Really important for us to get help and support. Human beings are pack animals. We are designed to be in a pack, a group of people. And so we thrive when we are supported by others and we share things. It's pretty hard though when you're the only one in your circle of friends who are having to cope with something as extraordinary as a possibility of an inherited disease. So it's good to come along to these things and share with others, so you can share your stories and get that support, that the camaraderie effect, that there are others going through the same sort of thing. I've been involved over the years with people who came back from 9/11 from New York. There were a few Kiwis who were over there, and they have struggled hugely because they came back to New Zealand and no one else was involved or part of it. We moved on, after 2 weeks of it, it was sort of yesterday's news, and we were worried about or thinking about the All Blacks or something like that. The people in New York were able to talk about it. It was the topic of conversation in all the bars and the families for a couple of years. And their ability to cope and manage, not the people who aren't right in the traumatic centre of it, but the general population, their rates of coping are much higher than the poor people who sort of left New York very quickly within the first few weeks and came back here because they had no one else to talk with. So we encourage you to talk with people that you can trust, and particularly those who have been in a similar situation to yourself. Get the support and hands from all those around you. So, building strength. How can we sort of put some resilience in? So, most of you will know who that person is in that corner there. It's Nelson Mandela, and he had to cope with a lot of adversity throughout his life and came out thriving. So, through adversity, we can actually thrive and cope. For some of you younger ones who might not know who that is. Oh, it doesn't work. I had a photograph. Here you are, stressful moment. I had a photograph of Liam Malone up there. Who knows who Liam Malone is? Our new Paralympic hero who has won 2 golds and a silver in the last couple of weeks. He too has had to cope with adversity and overcome it and win some gold medals for it. So how do people build strength and build resilience? Now, all of you, people ask me, with the transplant team, with you people, how do people cope? Well, the reality is you do cope. You have to. There's no option. What if you don't cope? So we do all cope with things, but there are some extra things that you can learn. We all have a toolbox of life that gets us through coping, but sometimes it's useful to have a variety of screwdrivers, and you might not know what there are extra screwdrivers that could be helpful. So I'm going to just run through a couple of the ones that I know that people have found really helpful in your sort of situation. And the number one thing I think is to look after yourselves. Do more of the things that you find that you enjoy. When we tend to be in a bad time or a stressful time, we stop doing the things that are important for us or the things that give us pleasure. So do take care of yourselves and take time out for yourself. Really important to do the physical activities, the relaxation, doing things, not competitive exercise, you can do that as well, but actually relaxing exercise, going for walks and noticing things. The mental relaxation things that help you to avoid and distract from the reality of what you're coping with. So most of us have worked out ways that we like to sort of shut out the world for a while. So there's things like going fishing or gardening or escaping into Chiclet or watching a movie or doing those sorts of things. So really putting some goodies in like that are really helpful to get you through if there's a crisis time. And absolutely accept any practical assistance that you can. We're not very good at accepting help. Most of us are better at giving help. But I think if you can learn to accept practical assistance, like asking someone to do the shopping or childcare or something like that. And most of us like to help others, but we don't know how or what to do. So improve your tools in your toolbox. The sort of buzzword at the moment is this resilience and toughness, which is the sort of strength and inner resolve that you can have that gets you through tough times, so that in a strong wind you break or bend. And we want people to bend, and that's having strong roots. So make sure that you've got the things that nurture you and support you are in there. The couple of things here is that it's to help you building resilience, which is your inner strength sort of thing, is to notice some of the positives around you. When we're full of a lot of bad things going on, we stop noticing some of the good things. And I was involved down in Christchurch, and what we did with the people there was, even though they were struggling with the earthquakes and the uncertainty and the unpredictability, and all their mind was focusing on surviving. What you do in those times is you stop noticing the good things that are going on, the things like the beautiful sunsets, or the noise of some children laughing and playing. And what we would do was focus on that for a minute and hold it and absorb the pleasure, so that you get a bit of balance, which actually feeds your roots so you get stronger. So it's the same thing as noticing, if the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. But it's those sorts of things as stopping and making sure that you do notice some good things. Or having the jar of jelly beans, and they're all the colours there, but all you can see are the black and the blue ones. But stop and notice the pink and the sparkly ones, or the bright colours. But do remember that you're all unique, and how you cope and how things are is individual for you, and that there's no right or wrong way to cope and do things, and that there's no time frame. In terms, some people get on with their lives and get on and do things quite quickly, others will take longer. If you get to the point where you're struggling consistently, then that's the time to probably seek some help or talk with your health professionals and see if you can get some professional counselling or whatever. Okay.
I know your assistants and your ongoing work is of benefit to many families in this room and to the wider CIDG group, so thank you very much. Our next speaker tonight is Dr. Annika Winbo, and I remember meeting with John not too long ago. He was incredibly excited to have secured the services of Annika from Sweden. Annika's done most of her training in Sweden as a paediatrician. Yeah. And we get excited about limited research, and this is exactly what she's going to tell us about today. And I'll try and do a short version of it. So taking human cells and developing them into cells that are fully beating little heart cells, and then those same cells having the DNA or the genetic makeup of long QT, which you'll do a much better job than I just did. But the fact that you're able to do that in this day and age, and the opportunity that presents, and the fact that it's just in a whole new emerging area of science, is something that Ryan, my colleague here, was sitting at a desk where he was like, this is pretty exciting, obviously a lot more than what you guys think it is, but it's okay. Come on up, give her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much for having me talk here today. So I agree fully, this is a very exciting time. So I'm going to talk to you about modeling long QT syndrome and turning patient blood cells into heart cells, and then what we can do with that. So this is sort of the reason why we are here. There is a genetic predisposition in the heart that leaves the body vulnerable to fainting spells or sudden cardiac death. So wouldn't it be great if we could then zoom in on the heart and look into the heart of an individual and tease out what's the risk, what can make this person healthy, what can be therapy, or how does it really work, but without actually putting that patient at any risk. So this is the project that we're running now. So we get blood cells from patients, they're my Swedish patients, and then these blood cells, the white blood cells, can be put back into a sort of stem cell state. So a stem cell is a cell that can make any other cell type in the body. And these cells we have now brought to Auckland, and we're pushing them to turn into heart cells. And those heart cells can then be looked at, so we can do electrical recordings, just like an ECG, but from within the cell, within the heart cell. So at the heart cell stage, that's where we're now. So these cells, they grow in small plastic boxes in wells, and we feed them. And we spend a lot of time watching them in the microscope. And if you sort of imagine looking into that microscope, when the all new. This is what they look like. So there's sort of this beating mass, homogeneous mass of just beating cells. And we're not doing anything to them. They know how to do this. So when they turn into heart cells, they will beat on their own. I've got one plate of heart cells that we got beating in May, and they're still beating away. Just feed them, and they go on. Another cool thing that we see is that with time, these heart cells will organize and build structures. And sorry, let's try again. See this one? There's hundreds of cells working together, making a strong chain, just like they would in the heart. So what can we then do with these cells? So they're feeding away, which is amazing. But so can we listen into what they're doing, what they're talking about, what their activity is? So from a typical electrical recording that a lot of you would have done, so you have a surface recording like an ECG on the surface of the body. But what we're doing is that we're actually recording from inside the cell. So on top there's a non-QT patient with a QT interval, but then on the bottom that's an action potential, which is sort of the electrical signature of the actual heart cell. So this is the setup in my lab. So I sit there, and then, well not now, but I usually, last night I was sitting there. And so that's a close-up of the ray. So it's a microscope, and it's got all these fluids that we need to feed the cells, and we keep them warm. And there's a close-up. So we've got the microscope, sorry. And then we've got a little bath, where we put the cells in a little brass lid. And then on the side, can you see the thing sticking in? So it's a tiny, tiny glass, it's a glass tube that's pulled, and that we go in, and then you sort of mess around it. And then you find the cell, and that's what the screen is for. And meet the single cell, like that, and then you open it up with a little suction, and then you're in the cell, and you record the action potentials from that living being cell. So I've got the coolest job. So this is a plant recording myself. So there are, I guess, maybe 50 or more, and they're in that little bath that I showed you, and they're beating away, and I'm about to touch them, but I haven't yet. And then here's the same pump. There's my glass electrode attached on, and can you see on the screen that for each time that beats, there's an action potential. And you can imagine that with the system, we're now starting to put drugs into the drip, so you can see what happens with these actual cells, living cells, when we're adding drugs for blockers, etc. So hopefully, if we do this again next year, we can hopefully tell you about the left-hand sides of feeding back the results to the patients, and hopefully learning more about what treatment is efficient, what are the risks, but in this model system. And these are the collaborators that I'm working with from Sweden, the States. Sydney has a finger in this, and then Joe and John here in Auckland. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. Now, I should mention that we're going to have a panel Q&A towards the end of the night. I'm sure you've got lots of questions about that. See, I didn't pick it up too much, so that was all incredibly interesting. And our next speaker tonight is Dr. Ivor Gerber, and he's an adult and congenital heart specialist working with patients with complex heart disease in the Auckland and Northland region. And Ivor works with CIDG and looks after dilated cardiomyopathy patients and families. Now, I've met Ivan very briefly, but the brief I've been given here says that you're very caring, which, you were quite nice to me before, and a very talented clinical specialist, and brings to the group his wealth of experience in imaging technologies, including advanced echocardiology. Ivan's talk tonight is about cardiomyopathy, and he asks the question, Is it all in the genes?
Thanks very much. I just wanted to start by saying when I came back to Auckland 12 years ago, almost to the day, 2004, I was warned by a number of colleagues to be careful about Dr. Skinner tapping you on the shoulder because that was going to lead to a little work, and possibly work you weren't intending to do. And it doesn't take long when you get back as a specialist to get your plate pretty full with a lot of work. And I dodged out for a couple of weeks and then got the tap on Tuesday morning. And he said, how would you like to become the resident expert in cardiomyopathies and join the CIDG group and start various clinics and do lots of work and learn lots of genetics? And he's a very hard guy to say no to, so I did say yes. And what I have learned in the last 12 years is that I wasn't doing John a favour, I think John did me a favour, because it's become one of the more privileged and nicer components of the work that I do, which involves both a lot of clinical work but also meeting families as part of the work that we do. So thank you, John. Just really for those in the audience who maybe find some of the words a little bit technical, cardiomyopathy is really nothing more than two components put together. Cardio meaning the heart and myopathy meaning an abnormal muscle, and therefore what cardiomyopathy means is that the heart muscle is not normal. This is actually a slide showing what happens to the formation of the heart in the first 8 weeks of your fetal life, long before you're born. And it's intriguing to see on the top left how things start off. It looks like a bit of worms, maybe some spaghetti, and then halfway down the slide it looks like a snail, until eventually you make your way to the bottom right, and only then do you start to realise that you're dealing with a 4-chambered beating heart. So it all happens rather quickly, within 8 weeks of conception. And it's really the bottom right-hand slide that doesn't really change a whole lot as far as its appearance for the rest of your life. This is just a gentle reminder of what a normal heart looks like. It's best to think of it the way you think of a car. You know, sometimes the car doesn't start in the morning. It doesn't mean the whole thing's falling apart. It could be any one component, and the heart's a little bit like that. There's lots of different components. You've got 2 pumping chambers called ventricles on the left and the right. You've got 2 receiving chambers called the atrium, and your heart is on the outside. And it's nice if they can all work all the time, but every now and then one or more components don't work, and that's when you have yourself a heart problem. A lot of people, I think, have always assumed that heart disease is a condition that comes with older age. And when you hear about your grandparents or your great-grandparents or even your parents as you get older who get heart disease, you tend to think of something that happens as a consequence of aging and perhaps a couple of poor lifestyle choices. But that really is not the case at all when it comes to genetic cardiac conditions like cardiomyopathies. And this is just to remind you that certain ways of life like smoking and diabetes and poor diet can lead to heart disease that we read about and hear about. But there is another area which is cardiac genetics, where that can afflict a person's heart at a very young age in a way that really is absolutely uncalled for and not in any way indict on the way the person has lived their life. We call these the inherited cardiomyopathies, and as I said before, it's an abnormality of the heart muscle, but there's different types, and they really are quite different from each other. Dilated cardiomyopathy is one type, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is another, arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, and then the less common condition called left ventricular non-compaction. So when a person gets told they have a cardiomyopathy, you might say, well, I've heard of someone, he's got that too. But it may well be they've got something very, very different to you. It's just the last part of that term is the same. A dilated cardiomyopathy is an abnormality where the heart muscle is, where the heart is dilated, it's enlarged. There's many reasons for having a large heart. In this particular condition, you can see on the left-hand side, the cavity of the left ventricle is very dilated. For patients with a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, you can see what's happened is that the cavity is not dilated, but the heart muscle is too thick. That's what the word hypertrophic means. There's too much muscle. In this condition, arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, the focus is not so much on the left side, but more on the right side of the heart, where that is very abnormal, and in many cases the muscle is replaced by fat cells. And the last of the conditions, left ventricular non-compaction, is really relatively uncommon, and has a very typical appearance, which you can see on the bottom right-hand side there, it almost looks like the fjords, where you've got these sort of channels going into the heart muscle, which results in the muscle not contracting normally, not working properly. Now, for all of you here today who've undergone various testing, you will know the sort of test that we typically do on almost all patients with inherited cardiac conditions. Just about no one gets away without an ECG, and this is a perfectly normal ECG, which everybody will have and might give you a clue as to what's going on. Most people with a cardiomyopathy will have an echocardiogram, which is a cardiac ultrasound shown on the left, and for some people we do cardiac MRI, which gives us a much more sophisticated look at the heart muscle, the heart chamber, and allows us to make a more accurate diagnosis. Now, the one thing that's quite unusual about this condition is how many variable ways you can present despite having the same condition. Just because you have a condition that someone else has, you may present in a very, very different way. For example, sometimes it's picked up purely incidentally. A person had an ECG for reasons like joining the army or wanting to become a pilot, and that leads from one test to the next, and next thing you find out you've got yourself a cardiomyopathy despite never having had any symptoms. Some patients present very unwell with heart failure. Some people have very fast heart rates, very slow heart rates, needing a permanent pacemaker. In some cases, as you heard earlier, an aborted sudden cardiac death, needing an ICD. And in many other cases, a growing number of patients are diagnosed with this condition due to family screening, where you're detected as having an abnormality despite the fact that you've never had a symptom a day in your life. And that does require an adjustment to come to terms with the fact that you may harbour a condition that is potentially life-threatening, despite the fact that you feel perfectly fine. This is the CIDG group that John has alluded to earlier, with John and Jackie at the forefront, but also it's really a group, a growing group, courtesy of John and Jackie over the years, that incorporates multiple people involved in multiple specialties throughout New Zealand, North and South Island. A lot of what we do in the clinics that I run with Jackie is to have a look at the family, take a look at the affected individual shown here in yellow, and then start asking questions about siblings, children, parents, grandparents, and we try and draw up a pedigree like this to get some idea in a schematic version who in the family is affected, who in the family died young. And the one thing which is quite unique about New Zealand is that in this particular family, you can see it's a relatively small pedigree of family, but this is an example of a family where Jackie tracked down tens of different people across the spectrum, across multiple countries and islands, all of whom, the more she asked, the more she found out, and the more she began digging, she realised that in fact multiple people in this family were affected in a similar way, and that allows for a much more accurate way of making a diagnosis, and in turn, most likely will save some lives as well by detecting members of the family that live elsewhere who actually are at risk of sudden death. Now, when it comes to doing blood tests or genetic testing, very often I think doctors and especially patients think the result is black and white. In other words, the result either says you do have the condition or you don't have the condition. And the more I've done this, the more I've realised that in fact the results often are a shade of grey. And whilst it would be nice to be absolutely certain and give you absolute certainty as to what you have, that does happen sometimes, but certainly not all the time. In fact, this is the sort of result sheet that we get when we get a blood test result back to see whether you harbour a mutation. And as you can see, when one first gets this, it takes a little while to get your head around exactly where in this lies the answer to the question, does this patient have a genetic mutation? And even when a mutation is found, if you look up at the top there in red, when the result comes back, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that the result is going to give you absolute certainty as to what it means. It might say you may have it, it's unlikely you have it, it's unknown if you have it, it's likely that you do, or it's almost certain that you do. But we've learned as we've been dealing with these tests how to look at the results, interpret them, to give you as much information as we can with confidence and not to give you information that 5 years from now is going to be found out to be false. The reason why it's so complex is that this is just a single example of some proteins and cells within the heart that has a myriad of different proteins. You can see sarcomere proteins and LMNA and so forth, and they all have genes encoded for them. And on the right-hand side, you can see the myriad of genes that can be abnormal, all of which can create the same sort of appearance of a dilated or a thickened heart muscle. It's not just a question of one abnormality, one size fits all. I'm not sure how many of you here have been to Table Mountain in Cape Town, but for those of you who have, you'll recognise this little creature on the left. That's called a rock rabbit or a dussie, and it's the size of a guinea pig. It's very small. And on the right, I'm quite certain you all recognise that as the elephant. But what you won't know necessarily is that they're genetically very similar to each other. In fact, they share a common genetic heritage, despite the fact that you look at them and think there's just about nothing in common between the two of them. And that's often the case with cardiomyopathies. There will be people in this audience who will be affected by cardiomyopathy, have someone else in the family also affected, and yet you will be playing out a very, very different condition. The one person has got a defibrillator and various medications. The other person with the same mutation seems to be leading a relatively healthy life in a milder form of the same condition. The one thing which is common to everybody, and I think it's improving the situation all the time, is that there are really quite a lot of options these days, as opposed to perhaps 15, 20 years ago, where often we didn't quite know what the diagnosis was and knew even less as to how to help people. These options include a range of medications that are very effective. They include pacemakers or defibrillators that can save lives. There are multitudes of surgery, which might be useful for individual cases. For end-stage cardiomyopathies, we have a very good heart transplant program that supports the country. And we always try to advise people that despite all of these options, it's also very, very important that the patient themselves take care of their lifestyle choices, such as drinking, smoking, and leading an active life. I would like to end to say that at the end of these talks, we will be available for questions and answers. Thanks very much.
Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Fascinating stuff. So I'm pleased to let you know that next up we're going to hear another family story from Don Lowe and Matt Williams. And Don and Matt are uncle and nephew. And Don was in a remote part of Northland and experienced a sudden cardiac arrest, which changed his life. And I'm very pleased that we're going to hear more about that story with Don and Matt. Here we go. Come on up. Do you want to share that?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight, and it's amazing what happens sometimes to be part of another bigger family. And also, one of the side effects of heart issues seems to be that, or with me anyway, has been that I've lost some of my filters. So I tend to say things that I shouldn't say, so I'll put a disclaimer in at the start of the speech.
That's my idea.
So we're on summer holidays in the Bay of Islands. Sort of, if I'm driving, it's 20 minutes from Russell, but most people half an hour, and close out to Cape Wreck. So we're quite a remote spot, and we were having a great family holiday with extended family around us, having so the joys of life. I think that bottom one there on the left is probably some of Matt's smaller fish, and so we were actually having a ball, and life was great. So you can see that we were enjoying the spoils of the ocean, and I guess I was bulletproof at that point in time. And that was New Year's Eve, and I think that was probably on social media somewhere, because like the Y's and the M's and the C's didn't sort of work out sometimes. But then at 1:30 a.m. on the 2nd of January, things changed in a big way. And Rob and my wife here, she woke to some odd sounds. I think initially it was probably a nudge, thinking that I was snoring, and then she thought, that's not snoring, and turned the light on to find that I was blue. And Matt especially Matt and all the family came to the party, and 111 was called, and just as you would normally do when you come to the Bay of Islands to have summer holidays with your auntie and uncle and family, Matt had a defibrillator and oxygen in his car that was just parked at our door. So he directed things very, very smartly, and the AED came out, so that certainly was the angel wings at the end of the day, and it was the availability of that AED so quickly that is, I think, the reason that I'm here today. We do have AEDs in the bay where we are, but that would have possibly been a 10-minute turnaround to get it to home. And in spite of us being in a very remote spot, the Russell Peninsula, there was a family trust that donated a number of AEDs, so that and the AED location app on your phone will indicate that. So, and it was amazing the number of people who came to the party, and as Robin said, I probably shouldn't really be speaking because I wasn't really amongst it, I wasn't there. It was some time before I came round, but the Rapi Fire Brigade, who were probably 20 minutes, half an hour away, arrived first and with an AED. St John's Ambulance arrived with an AED. There was an extra paramedic who was based in Russell came out and stayed with me for the duty. And there was friends in the bay that picked up one of the public AEDs out of the box in the bay as they came. There was the ferry skipper, because it was such a dirty night, the chopper couldn't come in, or couldn't get off the ground in Whangarei for a start. So I had to go by ambulance and to the Kawakawa Hospital, so they had to pull the ferry skipper out of bed to achieve that. And so there was, as it says there, ambulance to Whangarei Hospital briefly, and then I got choppered to Auckland. And to those wonderful people in Auckland Hospital, there was the Sarah Fitzsimons, the Nigel Levers, Catherine, the Jackie Crawfords, and all the family and friends, and of course here, ITM is a building company, but ITM for me is I'm indebted to Matt.
I get to use the boat whenever I want now.
So yeah, it's been just so lucky, and when you look at all those people that came to the party in order that, I sort of came to in Kawakawa Hospital and wondered what the hell all the attention was, really.
The first thing Don said he'd come to in his bedroom, he's semi-lucid, and he said, I haven't had 10 bedroom in my woman for quite a long time, and it's time I wanted.
So I think, Matt, you can cover on this.
I think we had, luckily numerous current first aid trained individuals in residence on the night. But the big thing for us was that we had an AED and we had it available. And this is a happy success story, but it may not have been the same without the AED. And I think no matter how good any of us are, manual resuscitation or first aid are, that really does make the difference. And it's not realistic for me to go out to you today and say, make sure you bring an AED with you everywhere you go, but do know how to use one, do know how to locate them, there's no excuses. Garth developed a great app, I think he'll talk on a bit later, which lets you know where they are. They're not in that short supply, we had 5 of them in the most remote part of the North Island within 20 minutes. So you do owe it to yourself and your loved ones to get out there and know how to use it and remain current. It's good to do a first aid course, it's good to know how to respond each time it happens. On the night, I think the real difference was the early recognition. We knew what was happening, we did something about it. Rob didn't know what to do at the time, but she knew to get help. We knew to go and get further help. There was an early response, we got there quick, we got hands-on. Even though they were doing, the police were tasked early, And then again, there was that early advanced care, so the ambulance was there within 45 minutes. We had defibs in the building. That's how we made a success story.
So the diagnosis the technology that was thrown at me when I was in Auckland Hospital was tremendous. So that initially they ruled out that I didn't have a plumbing problem, as they talked about it, and they handed me over to Sparkies. And then it was I went through I got the MRI of the heart, and that's when they were able to finally diagnose the HCM. And the end result was the insertion of an ICD, and that hasn't fired in 8 months, so and apparently it may not ever happen again. But and I guess the device that
I don't think anyone's seen this slide.
the device that I have is the subcutaneous one, so it's not wired through to the heart. So apparently we get the opportunity of less problems, and it's here and here and planted in here rather than up here. And so and that was that T-shirt there was belonged to Matt. And when I was in hospital, he brought it in because he thought that he didn't deserve to own it anymore.
I think we do have a good story tonight. Yes, we've made a little light of the situation, but it needs to be acknowledged. It wasn't an easy journey. The night, the weeks, the months that followed, and there's been a lot of resource in this room tonight that's gone into Don, helping the family on the journey through the emotional and the learning side. We've all come in knowing a lot more. Those genetically related, Don and gone had the test, so it is a big thank you to those who have done the work and those who have allowed the work and funded it to occur, because we know these things don't come cheap and they don't come easy. So thank you to those in the room. You are doing really good work, and you've got literally a family of supporters here.
And certainly it showed what a great family and friends I had around me, and that's been great, and that's continued on now with Jackie and the group. A blood sample, mine's gone off to Oxford, as was shown there before, and our kids have been tested, so to follow on, and it's the fact that I've survived means that maybe, and they know what it is, it might mean that our kids will have a better journey and understand where they're at.
Don's telling you now that the blood cell got sent because he's telling all his friends and fundraisers he's spending time at Oxford University.
Okay, thank you very much.
It seems I've got the order a little bit wrong, which we can remedy now. And actually, it flows a nice segue. Thank you guys. Really appreciate you sharing your story. And based on that YMCA photo, I think it suggests that maybe there were some filter issues before their cardiac arrest. Apologies, Simon, Karen, for getting the order wrong. How many were here last year? How many? Well, you all heard Simon speak, and I wasn't here, unfortunately. I was able to watch it later. Can I just say how impactful your story was from last year, and how delighted I am that you're back to be able to share for those that didn't hear last year. I'll leave it at that. Come on up.
Thank you very much. So when I was first chatting to John earlier today, he aptly described me as a very lay person. And in fact, in this room, it would be impossible to be more lay. I would have a pillow and I would be horizontal, because a lot of the charts that we've seen and the acronyms and the diagrams is the complete opposite to what I do in my day job.
But 18 months ago, I was introduced to this, the reason that we're here today. And so I just wanted to touch on some of the journey that we've been through, and hopefully that all makes sense. So our family is the current family, and we've got we have 3 lovely young girls, Jasmine, Bo, and Cleo. And like most young families at Christmas, it's somewhat frenetic in our household, particularly as it rolls on Christmas Day. There is screaming, there is emotion, there is tantrums, there's excitement. And that's my wife and I. The kids are great. They're probably all Christmas Day. And so once Christmas is finished, what we traditionally do is we head to the Bay of Islands, in fact not far from the last story. And Russell is where we base ourselves. And we do all those things that a normal family does at Christmas. We drink more than we should, we eat more than we should, we tell too many stories. But it's a wonderful time for us at that part of the year. And in Russell, this particular day, we headed to Rafferty. And we were boated just outside Rafferty on the 6th of January. And there's a wonderful thing about New Zealand, we say it's remote. It was remote. There would have been 4 or 5 boats in the bay. It was our last particular swim before heading back. And on board was Neri's father and our 3 kids and a cousin. And our oldest daughter, Bo, had jumped off, swam across the shore. And this is Jasmine for her last swim before we headed back to Auckland. And they say that a picture tells 1,000 words, and this tells the first half of those 1,000 words, because the next photograph that we have of Jasmine was taken 6 hours later in Starship in critical care as Jessie fought for her life. Because what had happened is Jasmine had walked down the back of the boat ladder and taken 3 steps and slipped. And it fell and fallen into the water. And we knew something was wrong, but I wasn't quite sure what, so I dived in, grabbed Jasmine, thrown her back up on board, and by the time I got up, I expected her to be somewhat bounced off, and as we rolled her over, Jasmine was blue and was dying. And had a wonderfully scary moment, in fact nothing wonderful at all, but scary moment of realising that we didn't know how to do CPR, and screaming for the beach, there were no doctors. And at about that point, an incredible series of miracles unfolded in Rafferty on the 6th of January. There was an emergency trained nurse on the beach who swam 40 metres and ended up doing 45 minutes of CPR. Amongst the commotion, the Rafferty Fire Brigade dispatched one of the defibrillators that were raised by the State Family Trust that was swum out to our boat. So within 9 or so minutes on the 6th of January, in the Rafferty Bay in the Bay of Islands, we had an emergency trained nurse, a defibrillator, and care was beginning on Jasmine. The time was out far enough that a helicopter could arrive, and myself and Jasmine were flown to Whangarei. But Jasmine was not at all good shape. And I could know enough, which was almost nothing, to know that things really were working out. I scanned Jasmine and sent that to Starship, and the next miracle for us that day is Dr. John Skinner happened to be in the emergency ward and happened to see the scan as they were preparing to give Jasmine adrenaline back at Whangarei, and had called and said, "You can't, because that would be the end." And there was arguments back and forward. Jasmine was flown into Starship and spent 6 weeks in and out of life support. During that process, they described to us that Jasmine had what they call a very rare and very nasty condition, and that's CBVT, which we've heard from earlier. They tried to wake Jessie up after 6 days and they couldn't do so. So 3 days they couldn't do it. Now after about day 6 they said, "Look, we're going to wake her up now, but you need to know she's got permanent brain damage. We need to tell you that because when we wake her up we don't know what we're going to find." So they woke Jessie up, and the first couple of hours were fairly rough, but we had our little girl there. And then within about 12 hours I went and saw the head neurologist at the time and said, "Look, quite a bit of Jessie's coming back. What's the story?" And they explained that the brain's the part of the body that we know least about. And what was possible is that Jasmine's definitely permanently brain damaged, but it could have been a redundant part of the brain. And the story plays out that that's exactly what happened. Jasmine survived, has permanent brain damage and a redundant part of the brain. Was released from Starship 6 weeks later with a defibrillator that sits under her ribcage. She got back to school, life went back to normal in some senses, and then recently, about 8 weeks ago, one of the wires in Jasmine's defibrillator shorted, which meant we were back in Starship, capital moved, had another put in. And Jasmine's 7 now, and she thinks it's fantastic. She loves going back to see her friends at Starship, likes the candy machine each time we go for a checkup. It's taken Mum and Dad a little bit longer than that to bounce back. But for Jasmine, that's just the way things are. And she's a Spider-Man fan and brags to her friends that they don't have a power pack, like she has. And our friends who want power packs, much to the horror of their parents. But nonetheless, that's just Jasmine's way of dealing. And as we left after 6 weeks in Starship, one of the nurses that we got on very well with said to us, "You were very lucky." And we said, "No, we thank you." And she said, "No, you were very lucky that Jasmine survived for a reason." And you sort of have that awkward moment of saying, "Thanks very much, I just really now want to go home." And she said her final words to us were, "No, but now you've got to work out what that reason was." And at the time that didn't really mean much. We'd gone back for our first checkup with Professor Skinner. And we said to Professor Skinner, "What could we do to help now? And that created a series of conversations, and as a family we started to do more and more reading on this topic. And what we found was incredible is that this is a condition, sudden cardiac arrest is a condition that is one of New Zealand's largest killers. That on an annual basis there are 1,900 events, and it rips the lives of 85% of Kiwis. Now that in of itself is incredible. It's incredible because it's the third largest killer of New Zealanders. But it flies under a radar that for some reason isn't talked about. Not because it's hidden, just because there is an understandable ignorance of it. Other countries don't have that same death rate. Now this is a slightly incorrect statistical comparison because the diagram on the right is a slightly different sample size, but it's Seattle. And in Seattle, when there is a witness cardiac arrest, there's a 64% chance of survival. And the fair comparison side by side is 34% in New Zealand and 64% in Seattle. So we double the percentage, but we're still half of what another country could be. And it's not like New Zealand's some third world country where we don't have amazing technology, we don't have all these things. So that got us trying to get our head around how could that possibly be? And so of course you're pointed to, well, the big differences in that survival rate are two things. It is the ability for great CPR and access to the defibrillator. And they're both important, but you can see the relative importance. And back to the earlier story, the one thing that really makes the fundamental difference is a defibrillator. But not only does it make a fundamental difference, actually every minute without that defibrillator makes a critical difference. So what we went on to learn is every minute you're without an AED at a time of sudden cardiac arrest, your chance of survival drops by 10%. And it's about this time that, for me, the most confronting story that is possibly untold in New Zealand is this. That it takes St John's, which are an incredible organisation, on average, 7 minutes to get to an urban centre where there's been a reported sudden cardiac arrest. By minute 4, brain damage has started. So by the time St John's arrive, there's 30% chance of survival. By the time they work out what's going on, get a machine on you, it's now 20% chance of survival. The story's worse if you live in a rural centre because they get there in minute 11. Statistically, it's impossible to live. Of course, some people do. So New Zealand has a radical shortage of these machines. And the thing is, these machines aren't like, they're not NASA-driven pieces of technology. You're going to see some shortly. They cost some $2,000, $2,500. We need to double the amount that we have. Wonderfully, the act that Garrett's created that you're going to see about will tell you where most of those defibrillators are. But the raise we need to do in New Zealand is about $11 million. It's believed we need around 10,000 of these machines. Now that being the case, I'm not quite sure now as a family member that's been through it and was one of the very rare small group that had fortunately leave with a good story, what statistic is required to make that difference? Is it the fact that it's New Zealand's largest killer, second largest killer? Is it the fact that it's 5 times the annual roll tell on an annual basis that die from sudden cardiac arrest? You are 650 times more likely to die from sudden cardiac arrest than you are to die in a fire. But every school does fire drills, and every school has an extinguisher, and every apartment block through legislation has to have them. But defibrillators, you don't. And up until this point, and forgive me for saying this, but there is an understandable ignorance of these facts and these statistics. Unfortunately for you now, there is no reason. So today, from this point on, it becomes a gamble. It's a gamble when you find yourself in that position. We did some work with St John's and a former McKinsey consultant trying to quantify through qualities what is on an annual basis, what is the loss of life. And every year in New Zealand, the cumulative years that are lost is this number, 7,800 years lost through death in New Zealand every year. And what you can do then is apply an economic number to that, to understand on an annual basis what does that cost New Zealand. And it's almost $200 million on an annual basis is sucked out of the economy. So whether it's an economic argument, whether in fact it's a gamble, whether it's the fact of betting on good luck, I'm not sure what it will take. But it doesn't seem to be that hard to put into terms that we can make a difference, because unfortunately in New Zealand tomorrow 5 people will die of a sudden cardiac arrest that is a treatable, savable condition, at least by odds, to increase our chances. Now the thing that I find incredible is when you share these stories, and stories that are unfortunately worse than our one, you can see a reaction where people think that's horrific, and they shake their head and they say that's just terrible. And often they write down on a notepad, what I'm going to do is get a defibrillator. I'm going to sort that out. And 6 or so months later you see those people and they say, yeah, I was going to get that defibrillator, I haven't done that yet. And so weirdly what must happen is there's a confronting story, and then what we like to do is depersonalize it. So we put some room in between those 2 points. And we go, well that's, of course that was that family because the girl obviously wasn't healthy or you know, doesn't happen to people like us. And unfortunately we were one of those families that said that doesn't really happen to people like us. But until the message gets through, it really will. Because the thing about this particular cause, or this particular issue, anyone, anytime, anywhere. So the question that we like to start posing with some of our friends and family now is, you would hope that if it's one of your friends, neighbours, colleagues, family members, classmates, that there's an opportunity to be prepared. And so, as a family, we've been on that journey ourselves to try and raise some money for a defibrillator. And without saying it's very easy, because it's not really easy, it does take some effort. But our eldest daughter, who's 9, went to, when Jasmine had survived, we went to our local primary school, and I went to see the principal at school and said, look, Jasie's made it, she'll be back at school shortly. I said, just out of interest, can you tell me where the defibrillator is? Because, you know, I'm sort of that guy and I'd like to know. And she said, no, we don't have a defibrillator. I said, you got 650 kids. Why is that? She said, they're very expensive. They're $2,500. It's a flat white for every parent, and we have a defibrillator, but still no defibrillator. So my 9-year-old got pissed off by that, and she over 3 weeks had mufti days and raffles and stood at the school gate and greeted families with their story as they came through and said, you know, for the cost of a flat white, we can put a defibrillator into a school. And I understand that not every region is the same, has the same economic balance, and it might take 6 weeks, it might take a year, but it's possible to do. Fortunately, for some of the incredible clients that I work with, Goodman Fielder will be an example of a client that bought 14 defibrillators and put them throughout New Zealand. My wife Neroli works at Nike, and we put in 17 defibrillators across New Zealand and through the Pacific. And as a family, we've tipped up about 30 defibrillators since this has happened. Not because it's a symbol of pride, but because it's an easy thing to do, and it gives more families the chance of having an 85% survival rate. So it would be wonderful to think, in closing, and thank you very much for the opportunity of coming back and for sharing the story, that in the room there might be 100 people, I'm not sure, Jackie, what the actual number is. But if it were possible for this time next year, for each person that's in the room to play a role getting 2 defibrillators into circulation, that's net $5,000. That would mean that there are 200 new defibrillators in circulation in 12 months. And what I've found is I think if we start making proclamations of what we can do, there's more chance it will happen. So wouldn't it be wonderful to be back at this time next year to be able to show a chart that said somehow New Zealand's put 1,000 new defibrillators in circulation, all under Double Gowans Act, so that this room can sit back and say not only are there medical advancements, but this doesn't feel like the responsibility of a government or a corporate. This is citizens, communities, mums and dads and daughters and pissed off sisters. So hopefully we can make a difference, and hopefully that story can play a role. Thank you.
Excuse me. Well, that's just amazing. It's always so moving coming to this meeting. I just want to say thank you to everybody. I can't speak anymore. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we were going to do a Q&A session, but given time, I want to give you a chance, so people will need to get away. I think what we'll do is we'll pause while I get instruction from Jeannie.
We've got an AED demonstration right now, right here on the stage.
That's what we're going to do.
Laura, don't pressure Laura.
Hi guys, I really won't keep you very long, but I think all the talk about automatic external defibrillators, we really need to see how one works. And I promise you, I am not a doctor, I'm not from a medical background, but they're so easy to use, and it's really important when we talk about them that we know how to use them. So I'm going to give you a really quick demo, so please just hold fire before you go. Just give my little wrist in your hand here. So we have actually got a live AED here in the right place. Sorry, give me 2 minutes. I need to just plug this in. This is our live AED, and this is what they look like. There are some different types, but these are the Laerdal Phillips model that we promote. They're designed to be very easy to use. Mums and dads can use them. You just follow the voice prompts. They do their own self-diagnostic check to make sure they're working every day, and they will bleep at you like a smoke alarm detector if anything needs replacing, if the pads need replacing. Inside here, you've got a kit, a pair of scissors to help you take the clothes off, and you've also got a face cloth to go over if you want to do your breasts. But I'm going to quickly show you on the trainer. This is not working. Sorry, guys. Just got that one properly. Okay, so inside the red case, this is what it looks like. Okay, I'm just going to start using the AED because it will talk you through. So first of all, we're going to press the green button.
Begin by removing all clothing from the patient's chest. Cut clothing if needed.
So just use your imagination here. We're going to cut the clothing off. We're going to pull these plastic off. Inside you've got some pads.
Remove protective cover. Look carefully at the pictures.
Each one has got a picture on them.
Peel one pad from the yellow flaked pad exactly as shown in the picture. Press firmly to patient's bare skin.
So at this tight stage, what it's doing is it's trying to find a heart rhythm.
No one should touch the patient.
I don't know if you can see that.
Shock advised.
So the orange light is flashing, so we're going to press that. At this stage, the body will convulse. Okay? And it's a very panicky situation, so you might have forgotten the first aid training and forgotten the CPR. If you're in that situation, then press the blue button. Then you're going to start your CPR. So nice straight arms. And we're going to do 30 compressions. Sorry, I'm not sure if you can hear that. Sorry, it's a bit of a creepy breathe voice. You're going to carry on with your CPR. I'm just going to turn this off while I talk to you a little bit about it. So I have to try and connect the the mic so you could hear that a bit better. But we're outside if you guys want to come and have a go at trying to use the LED. But a few things to know. Basically, the position of the pads.
So why don't we get someone to actually do this with you?
Oh yeah, Claire. Are we not going to pick on someone?
Become. Yeah, we're going to make Claire resuscitate that mannequin. You've got to bring it back to life. I can come on stage. Well, thank you, everybody. The round of applause. This company, Tara Breweries, had an employee called Matthew Lanning and his family here tonight. And, excuse me, they've raised money to buy 6 AEDs which have gone into our Auckland City Hospital pool and around the country where families who need one actually have one. So, over to you guys.
Okay, Claire, so it's all down to you now. Okay, it's easy to use. So what you're going to do first of all is you just get down onto your knees. The guy's had a cardiac arrest, he's not feeling too well. Press the green button or pull. That's it. Take the pads out.
Look carefully at the pictures on the white adhesive pads. Peel one pad from the yellow plastic liner. Place pad exactly as shown in the picture. Press firmly to patient's bare skin.
It's very nerve-wracking,
When the
obviously,
first pad is
in
in
this
place,
situation.
look carefully at... No one should touch the patient.
We're standing clear at this point. So it's analysing
No one
to see if
should
there's a
touch the
heart.
patient.
It won't shock if there's
Analyze. Shock advised. Stay clear of patient. Press the flash shock delivered. Be sure the ambulance service has been performed. It is safe to touch the patient.
Now you can
Start
start
CPR. For help with CPR, place the heel of one hand in the center of the chest between the nipples. Place your other hand on top of the throat. Push the chest down firmly 5 centimeters.
Oh, well,
How many compressions? How many breaths? Yay. Thanks guys, I know we're short of time, but please